welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really fascinating, maybe a bit controversial too. Acquired Savant Syndrome, or ASS. This is where someone has, say, a serious brain injury, and then suddenly, boom, they have these incredible new skills in art or music or maybe math. But here's the twist. The material we're looking at today, it isn't your typical scientific paper. No. We've got a transcript of what's called a subliminal investigation. Basically an exploration done in a trance state, trying to understand the hidden causes of ASS. And crucially, we're also looking at a later analysis that critiques this very method.
Right. And our goal here is really twofold. First, we want to unpack these, let's say, esoteric claims from the trance session ideas about energy, consciousness, how these abilities might actually pop up. But just as importantly, maybe more so for you listening, we want to give you a critical lens. How do you evaluate information that comes from these, well, non-traditional sources? How reliable is it really?
Okay, let's dive in then. Where should we start? Maybe with what the investigation claimed is happening inside the brain, the biological side, as they saw it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the visualization that came through described the brain in a state of intense adaptation. Picture this. Certain areas, maybe the damaged ones, appear like the lights are off. Light skinsa, as the original Romanian might put it. But then other areas, the ones still working, they don't just keep going, they potentialize. They ramp up their activity massively.
Yeah, potentialize, so they get stronger. How does that happen? Is it like rerouting power?
That's exactly how it was perceived. A transfer of energy or flux moving from the non-functional zone to the functional ones. It's seen as the brain's core adaptive function just kicked into overdrive by the trauma or injury. The result being these sudden, sometimes really spectacular new abilities emerging.
Right, okay. And the source material gave some pretty vivid examples of this, didn't it? It wasn't just abstract theory. They talk about compensation, like how organs in the body compensate, the liver's failing, maybe the pancreas and kidneys pick up some slack. A biological parallel.
Exactly. They use that as a grounding point.
But then applying it to the brain gets weirder. I remember reading about someone using their limbs, maybe their foot, to paint. And the claim was the brain's creative zone adapted so much that the foot started acting like, what was it? Like a hand and a foot combined.
Yes, that was one of the specific examples. It highlights the sheer extent of the adaptation they were describing.
And the trigger for this, it's the shock, right?
Yeah.
Physical or emotional trauma basically flips a switch.
Precisely. The shock acts as the catalyst. It activates these previously dormant or latent brain circuits. The visualization was like flipping them from a sort of neutral gray state to becoming actively illuminated.
Okay, so the brain hardware adapts, reroutes energy, activates latent circuits.
No.
But where does the actual knowledge come from? Like the complex math formulas or the musical composition skills?
Now that is where the investigation takes a really interesting turn. It draws a sharp distinction between the mind and consciousness. The core claim is this sophisticated information, the actual content of the savant skill, it's not stored in the human mind. The mind is seen more as the rational processor, the day-to-day operating system.
Okay, so if it's not in the mind, where is it?
It resides, they claim, in the human consciousness. Consciousness is pictured as this vast reservoir holding immense latent potential and information.
Whoa. So the mind is like my laptop's RAM, constantly working, but consciousness is like the entire internet, holding everything.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. The mind accesses and processes, but the consciousness holds the raw, vast data.
But then, how does the physical brain, the hardware, suddenly connect to this massive consciousness library after an injury? What's the data cable?
According to this investigation, the bridge is the physical brain structure itself, but more specifically, the DNA within the person.
DNA.
Yes. The DNA is proposed as the critical link, the unique biological key that allows the information held in that vast consciousness to be translated or downloaded into the rational mind, making the skill manifest.
Okay, that's a huge concept. Our DNA is a bridge to universal knowledge, basically. And this is where it branches out even further, right? Beyond just internal adaptation, the investigation suggested external sources for these abilities too.
Exactly. It gets even more complex. They outlined two main paths for abilities coming from outside the individual.
Right. The first one was external capture, like the person becomes an antenna.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
They described it as the person extending their antenna, metaphorically speaking, to capture information directly from the exterior field, the ether, you might call it, pulling knowledge from the environment.
Okay, like a super sensitive receiver picking up cosmic signals. What was the second path? That one sounded even stranger.
The second path was described as a form of possession, but they were careful to specify non-malefic, not demonic or harmful.
A malefic possession.
It's framed as a second consciousness, one that holds specific knowledge or skills and has the intention of manifesting them, connecting with the person's body. So essentially, you have two consciousnesses operating through one physical form.
Two consciousnesses in one body. Wow. And did they say anything about the original person's consciousness in that scenario?
Often, yes. In those cases, the investigation reported seeing the host's own subliminal aspect, their deeper self, as perhaps young or seeming unadapted to physical life, maybe even reluctant to be fully present in the body. Sometimes the visualization suggested the host allowing this second entity access was a kind of sacrifice, a willing agreement at some level.
Okay, this is getting deep. So whether it's the antenna model or the two consciousnesses model, did they describe a typical profile for these individuals, energetically speaking?
They did, and it was remarkably consistent. These individuals tend to show highly developed superior chakras, chakra 7 and upwards. These upper centers function like powerful relays or captators, excellent at tuning into that non-physical external information.
But there's a catch. Right, it wasn't all balanced.
Not at all. That's the crucial part. While the upper chakras are hyperdeveloped, the lower ones, chakras 1, 2, and 3, which govern grounding, vitality, emotional life, connection to the physical world, are often severely underdeveloped.
How underdeveloped?
Sometimes described as barely a supporting thread. Just enough to keep the physical body running, but not much more.
So you get this disconnect. Incredible mental or psychic abilities.
Exactly. They might grasp incredibly complex university-level math, like instantly. Pure neuropsychic power.
And they struggle with the basics.
Profoundly. The sources describe them having trouble with simple adaptation to earthly life. Things we take for granted, like not intuitively understanding that fire means heat or smoke means danger or whether water is hot or cold. There's a fundamental lack of vital energy, emotional depth, and crucially, the drive, the voyai, to navigate physical reality.
Right. All processing power, no grounding wire. And that makes them vulnerable.
Very much so, according to these sources. That lack of grounding, the underdeveloped willpower, makes them easily manipulated, despite potentially genius-level intellects. They lack the energetic foundation to really assert themselves or navigate the complexities of the physical world effectively.
Which leads to the big question, why now? Is this happening more? The sources suggested reasons for an increase in acquired savant syndrome.
Yes. They pointed to two primary drivers, interestingly weighted as 50-50 causes for the recent rise.
Okay, what were they?
50% of the increase was attributed to some kind of interference or modification of human DNA.
DNA modification, okay. And the other 50%?
The other half was attributed to the deliberate lowering into physical incarnation of consciousnesses, carrying specific information deemed necessary for the current times.
So entities choosing to incarnate now, bringing specific knowledge needed for humanity's evolution, kind of like planned insertions of new data.
That's the implication, yes. Consciousnesses arriving as catalysts, essentially, carrying blueprints or information humanity needs at this stage.
And for these individuals, especially those with the weak lower chakras, how do they cope? How do they adapt to being here?
The path to adaptation, to anchoring or grounding, is described as needing intensive, dedicated external support. It often falls to the family, particularly a figure representing the nurturing mother archetype. It requires immense love, patience, and teaching them the absolute basics of functioning in the physical realm step by tiny step. Like teaching a child, but perhaps even more fundamental in some ways.
Okay. We've laid out these really extraordinary, almost unbelievable claims from the trance investigation: DNA bridges, external capture, dual consciousnesses, modified DNA, purposeful incarnations. But now we hit the pivot point. The source material also included a critical analysis of this very method. How does that analysis tell us to view all this information we just discussed?
Right, and this is absolutely crucial for context. The critique part is very direct. It states that information gathered in a single session of hypnosis or trance investigation is, frankly, highly contaminated and distorted. The term used was that the contamination percentage is absolutely high.
Absolutely high. So most of it is noise. Why?
The analogy they use is quite powerful. Imagine trying to talk to someone who's underwater and you're both speaking different languages. The medium itself, the water, representing different dimensions or states of consciousness, distorts the message. And then the interpretation is filtered through the subject's own beliefs, culture, fears, expectations. It warps the original signal significantly.
So it's like a garbled translation through a bad phone line, underwater.
Pretty much, yeah. That's the level of distortion they're suggesting for single session data.
Okay, if it's that contaminated, then what's the point? What's the actual value of doing a single session investigation like the one that produced all these ASS theories?
The critique clarifies this. The value is not in getting factual, reliable information to be memorized or treated as doctrine. Not at all. Instead, it acts as a vehicle. It's a starting point, a sort of symbolic map that can help guide the practitioner and the client in addressing the client's underlying esoteric issue or imbalance. It gets the therapeutic or investigative process moving in a certain direction.
So it's like a metaphorical clue, not a literal answer.
Exactly. It provides symbolic language to work with, but you absolutely cannot take it as established fact about the nature of reality or the specific condition being studied.
That implies a really, really high bar for what is considered reliable information in this field then. If one session is mostly noise, how do they ever validate anything?
The standard described is incredibly stringent. They only consider information reliable if it appears consistently across a vast number of independent sessions.
How vast?
Thousands. Thousands of sessions with different subjects, different practitioners, ideally with no prior contact or knowledge influencing each other. Only patterns that emerge independently again and again and again are even considered potentially valid.
Wow. Thousands of sessions. And even then, how much of the total information gathered actually meets that standard?
The estimate provided in the critique is sobering. They suggest that maybe only 2 or 3% of the total volume of information gathered across all those thousands of sessions might be considered reliable.
2 or 3%.
Yes, meaning 97 to 98% of everything channeled or visualized or reported in these states is ultimately discarded as contamination, distortion, personal belief, or just noise.
That's an almost unbelievable level of filtering. It really puts single reports into perspective. Do they give examples of things that did make it into that tiny reliable percentage?
They do mention a few examples to illustrate the principle. Things like consistent descriptions of certain types of entities, the gray extraterrestrial archetype being a classic example, or common patterns in the shapes, locations, and perceived functions of energetic implants found on subjects worldwide. It's that level of uncanny consistency across thousands of independent data points that gives it weight, not the dramatic content of any single session.
Okay, so this whole vetting process forces us to look at the fascinating claims about acquired savant syndrome, the consciousness link, the external sources, through a very critical lens. It's fuel for thought, maybe inspiration for further questions, but definitely not something to accept as proven fact based on one investigation.
Precisely. It creates this inherent tension, doesn't it? We have these potentially revolutionary ideas about human potential, DNA, consciousness, maybe even outside influences. But the very methodology used to explore them tells us up front that most of the specific details obtained are likely unreliable on their own.
Yeah, so this deep dive really highlights that tension. On one hand, these extraordinary claims about how savant abilities work, consciousness downloads, energy shifts, external entities, and on the other hand, the absolute necessity of rigorous, almost ruthless skepticism and methodological critique when dealing with information obtained this way. Real insight needs both that imaginative leap and the critical grounding.
It leaves us with a lot to think about, and perhaps a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over, stemming directly from that tension. The source material suggested a 50-50 split for the rise in ASS cases, half due to DNA modification interference, half due to purposeful lowering of consciousnesses necessary for the current times. Considering that, and considering the methodological critiques suggesting maybe only 2-3% of such information is reliable, which of those two proposed factors, DNA changes or deliberate informational downloads, do you think might ultimately have a greater impact on our future adaptation? And how could we ever reliably figure out which one, if either, is truly driving things, given the immense challenge of validating this kind of data?